Good morning, Nomiki. How are you, mate?
Good evening from from across the planet. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for connecting with us. I mean, it's been a bit of a. It's a failing of mine, but I don't do the calendar invites, which is you're the second person in 2 weeks to say, for our guests, we always do calendar invites. I'm like, yeah, fuck, I should get onto that. It should be something I do because
They
I just
make it
intend to
so
make a link.
easy.
Yeah, but I don't. I've got a Mac. My problem is I'm using a PC in my studio, and I've got a Mac laptop. So straight away, I'm like, well, how do I send it? What do I do? So I think I might have to bite the bullet and go with those Gmail ones that I sent you because it was easy. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, cool, man. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to have a bit of a chinwag with you and talk life in the universe.
I love this. Yeah. So many things I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, we call this the Department of Conversation because we really do just chat.
I love it.
I had a guy on for Easter Friday who was a reverend because it was Easter, you know, and he was saying, can I ask you some questions? And I'm like, fucking oath you can. Of course you can. You know, it's like, this is what we do. It's like having a chat in a pub over a beer at 11 o'clock at night with a person you've just met.
Exactly. I should actually, it is now officially 5 o'clock on a Friday. I should just go and pour myself something.
Well, I mean, if you have a look at my background, if you were here, I'd give you some of our local gin or my Irish whiskey here. When my mum passed away in 2018, my name's Pat. My mum called me Paddy, and so a good mate of mine bought me some Paddy Irish whiskey for when that happened. So when people are in studio with me, that is exactly what we do. Because why not?
I'm a big fan of it. I don't even care what time of day it is. I'm Greek. We do in the morning. My my grandfather's sister, who was in her 90s. I went to go visit her in the village of like Nowheresville, Albania, and I like slept there for the night in my grandfather's house that like he hadn't been back to since he escaped Albania. And it's like a very emotional time. And I go down the stairs in the morning and I have to get in the car and I have to take this treacherous route back. And she's sitting there in the kitchen and she hands me, I'm thinking she's gonna hand me coffee. She hands me like rubbing alcohol, basically. And she's like, this is for the road. And I'm like, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. So if that woman, that 94-year-old or however I don't know how old she is now, but like if she could do it, I'm like, anybody can drink at any time. There's socially accepted. This is not, unfortunately, this is just tea. So
but if she's 94, maybe that's testament to that being a viable and positive aspect to your life. If she's made it 94,
let's go with that.
I mean, come on. Let me ask you something though, and then this is completely off topic and stuff, but it's just you've mentioned being Greek, and I've always wondered, you know, that stereotype or that we see it in the movies of the Greeks breaking plates as a celebration. Is that a real thing? Is that something that happens?
Yes, but like it's kind of weird. It's more of like a cultural, like a westernized cultural thing. It exists. I actually, in a non-performative place with like Westerners, or I guess Greece is West, like it's the first West, but like whatever, you know, Americans, as the Greeks would say, white people. And I know people who are white are like, or people of color, like, you can't say that, you're from Europe. I'm like, I know, but Europe is a different thing. Like there's, it's a different thing. What we would, I just realized my mic's not plugged in. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Look at that. Yeah, what people is it's for the tourists. It's for the, I don't know. I've never been to an event where someone does that. I know it's a thing that's rooted in culture. I just don't know when. I've never been any. I mean, maybe I should just Google it. My family never did it.
Right.
It's a wedding thing. I mean, if they do it for wedding, it's because there's people that are not Greek there.
It's funny how you would say, you know, when talking about black people and people of color, from this side of the world, and basically where I live, the next step is Antarctica, right? So we're right at the bottom of New Zealand. So and we get a lot of our winds and stuff from there. So I grew up in Auckland, which is the biggest and northernmost city in New Zealand. Not northernmost city because there's Whangarei is above it. But anyway, the significant city in the top part of the North Island. And that gets all the winds and water from the Pacific Islands because we're in the Pacific. Whereas at the bottom of the South Island, which is where I am now, it gets all the winds and the water from the south. So our beach in the middle of winter here in Dunedin is 12 degrees Celsius, which is double at 25 at about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take.
Math is good on that. I'm so proud of myself. It only took me 38 years to figure that one out.
Well, it's always fun when we talk. I mean, because it's a cultural thing, you know. Americans are weird using Fahrenheit, not using metric, and it seems to be the only place in the world holding on to, you know, feet and inches and that kind of stuff. Everyone else seems to use metric, but we have to learn it to communicate with your lovely fellow citizens of the world.
You know, it's imperialism.
Yeah, but I was going to say that to me, it even feels a bit uncomfortable talking about black people, because that's not a term that we even really use in New Zealand, or I've used. And I know that it's appropriate, and you know, you talk about black and white people, but it kind of feels like the absolute definition of putting someone in a box for their skin color, whereas it's used as a white, which it is, but then it's used statistically in a way, it seems, for me. I mean, I consume American content all day, every day. Like, all my screens are always on some kind of American content.
I'm so sorry.
It's just kind of what it is, you know. The blacks and the whites, and these are the, and like I had a university professor who was quite controversial in some parts of the world, called James Flynn, who set up this IQ theory called the Flynn effect, and it's a worldwide theory. And he was talking about, and when he said about the IQ of Asians, and he said, and the blacks, and I was just like, this just feels so wrong. But it's what he was referencing as a category of people from a sector of the world. He's passed away now. He was about 85 when he came on the podcast. It feels weird. It feels weird referencing a group of people, even if it's accurate by how much melanin they have.
No, it's weird. I mean, so I've worked in Europe, and I've worked in Latin America, and in different parts of Latin America, and different parts of countries in Latin America that have different ways of dealing with race. And I think what's unique to the United States, it does overlap with some other countries, of course, especially in Latin America. But what's unique to the United States is that we have so many waves of immigrants that have experienced forms of culturalism and racism and ethno whatever response to. We were really built off of a white supremacist libertarian kind of exercise, and in the African American community, which is not the Black community entirely, and that's, I think, also confusing to folks, is there's the reason, we went from saying African American to, I feel really uncomfortable even talking about this, because this is not, I'm not the person who should be talking about this, but we started going back to saying Blacks, because it's not like the way that Donald Trump says the Mexicans, the women, the Blacks. I think there's something about saying it that way that is very condescending and patronizing and supremacist. But a lot of stuff is built off of our way of classifying folks, partly because government creates assistance for different folks, and they want to, every 10 years we have a census, and they need to understand, what's going on in different communities. And our communities are unfortunately built off of redlining and immigration. But I think the difference is between the US, because we had redlining, and because we had two different forces of there's slavery and white supremacists, and that's pretty much it. And then the immigrant wave came in and disrupted all that. And you had immigrant communities like the Irish and the Greeks and the Italians, who were also looked down on. And the Greek community walked across the are we live? I just realized.
No, we're just talking.
Are we recording? I don't care if we're recording.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just talking.
The Greek community were really strong allies to the African American community, the formerly enslaved community, partly because when MLK walked across the bridge, the Greek Orthodox archdiocese was there. If you look at the picture, he was right there next to him.
Saying Peter's Bridge.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's so funny when you're talking about American history. I don't know where people's outside of the US, or even inside the US, frankly, I don't know where or like the history basis. So I sometimes just generalize things and don't realize that there's.
Well, I mean, you may not be aware of this. I mean, you're a smart human individual. Maybe you are. So I might be not mean to sound patronizing, but the rest of the world is influenced by America in a way that America is not by the rest of the world. So I know a huge amount about your lives and culture, and that because there's an old adage, and I don't know if you've heard this before, but the rest of the world would have heard this, that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Because that's how much influence the American populace is, the entertainment industry, the music industry. So, and because of that, I mean, if it is the movie industry, then obviously a lot of your stories, historically speaking, get told, and so we learn. I think as we were talking about this idea of classifying people, I think I actually realized the first time why it feels uncomfortable. If you're talking about Hispanic Americans, or Asian Americans, or Iranian Americans, they're classified on where they've come from in the world.
Yeah.
They're not classified on how much melanin they have in their skin when it comes to statistics. Whereas African American, to me, feels that feels more, it just feels more appropriate. Whereas when I hear so often in media, and it's not by any one side, it seems to be everyone in American culture just talks about Black America or the Black culture. It's like, we talk about, or you talk in America, talk about, let's say, Asian Americans, then it's because of the culture based out of a continent, which is identified in the name. It's not based out of the color of their skin. So that's why it kind of feels a bit, I reckon that's, to me, why that feels odd.
Oh, totally.
To talk about it in that way. But it seems so accepted by everyone. Like, not even our lovely friends on the liberal left sort of thing are going like, oh no, we don't use the term because we don't just, everyone does it. And it's just like, because it seems so easy, it feels so weird.
Yeah. I mean, and on top of that, like, African American was like taken out of the vocabulary. It's like in the 90s and the 2000s, early 2000s, the aughts, whatever you want to call it. No one ever says that. I don't know how to. It was more accepted to say African American, but yeah, I mean, for a lot of reasons, folks didn't feel like it's complicated. It's like, how far into your legacy, and there's Afro-Caribbean, there's I mean, there's so many different versions, and it really comes down to like, well, how far back do you want to go? And I think that's what the whole world is based off of immigration, right? And I'm doing a documentary in Puerto Rico, and going off on a little tangent here, but there is in Puerto Rico, folks really, good folks really love the Taino native population that was it was ravaged in the Caribbean. And a lot of people feel as if so much of the culture of Puerto Rico is rooted in Taino native culture, who the Spaniards, wrecked, like completely like murdered and slaughtered, because that was Columbus's, like, Columbus arrived, he was like kind of chill for a bit. I'm going to give you a brief history. And then like some other colonizers came, and then Columbus is like, oh no, we can't do this. Okay, I guess we're going to kill him now. Like I got along with the Indians for like a minute, and now, but we gotta, to be able to survive, we have to like murder them all. So more or less that's what happened. But this is like third grade version of history right now. But what was interesting about Taino, which is not third grade history at all, the Taino population, so people adored the Taino population. And I went to Cuba a few weeks ago, and I delved into Cuban history the way I have with Puerto Rican history. And they talked about the Tainos and how the Tainos were pushed out of Cuba, and then they went into the DR and into Puerto Rico. But they had initially been from like the Venezuela area. And I guess when they arrived in Cuba, they tried to conquer a more collective, sort of like matriarchal native population, and they enslaved them. And then they did that in Puerto Rico, and that's why the Tainos were able to flourish. They took over another native population, which makes me realize everybody was just colonizing everybody. Like,
yeah, I think so.
That was it. It was like the Tainos were the colonizers of the matriarchal kind of like communal native community. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments on this, but bottom line is, we're all just a couple hundred years away from another colonized population. And, it's more pronounced today in the US, like 60 years ago, the Greeks were considered, they're walking across, they're fighting alongside against the KKK, because the KKK was burning down Greek Orthodox churches. Today, majority of Greeks in the United States, Greek Americans, voted for Trump. So I'll leave it at that.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Look, we should also let people know about how to find you and what you're about, because I just as is wont to happen with my podcast, I just kind of start talking and we haven't given you a proper introduction, which is very very rude
Kind of
of me.
fun. No, I thought it's kind of
Namiki.
fun. I like it.
So Nomiki Show is twice a week, isn't it? Wednesdays and Fridays, 8 p.m. in the US, which depending on where you are in the world, here in New Zealand, it's I don't know. It's the middle of the afternoon. It's about 6 hours. So what time? We're about 6 hours apart, aren't we? It's early morning here, and it's early evening there, basically.
So it's like 1 a.m. where you are right now?
No, it's not that early morning. It's like 9 a.m. No, like
We're very
early
far.
reasonable. Early
It's
reasonable.
5 p.m. here right now. So
Yeah,
do
so
the math
9
on
a.m.
that
is your
one.
5 p.m. So that means your 8 p.m. it'd be quite nice, right? It's you do a lunchtime show for us
There
here
you
in
go.
New Zealand. So and around the world, obviously people can work it out.
Perfect.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I always find it crazy, the idea of different parts of the world where they are, because here in New Zealand we see the sun first. So
know,
even
it's
though I
amazing.
kind of go, we're behind you. In other words, in time, you're 5, we're 9 a.m., you're 5 p.m. It's actually
Right.
we're ahead of you the next day.
You're
But
ahead
it's
of us,
easier
for sure.
to think, to work it out. Your 5 p.m. is now our 9 a.m. And yeah, I also enjoy watching you on, seeing you pop up and around on the Majority Report with Sam Seder. Sam's been on the podcast before in the
Great.
past. Yeah, I'd love to get Emma on one day as well. I've sent a couple of emails, but you guys are busy over there. Never hear anything back.
No, not texts or emails. I got to tell you, because there's so many. It's not you type pitch. Like we get so many story pitches, and
Yeah.
also if anybody knows about the left media, we're not some sort of like well-oiled machine where we have bookers on this and that. Right? It's everyone tries, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to like your producer and you, and you can get your stuff together. So
I'm interested as to what you've just said, just what you just dropped there about not being very well organized. Is that a left thing? Because from this side of the world looking in, I mean, I always like talking to Americans about American politics and culture. And I'm always been of that opinion that I relate everything to sport. I was going to talk to you about the Brooklyn Nets at some stage, but I
no,
relate
that's
everything
not
to
me.
sport.
That's Emma.
No, no.
I'm not a
But
sporty person.
but this can you'll get this anyway. I always
Okay.
talk about, if the sports field, pick your sport. Here in New Zealand it's rugby, and in the US maybe American football. If the field is your life, like the players on the
Yeah.
field are your life, at times someone in the stand looking at the field will see better what's going on the game, i.e. your life, than someone who's actually on the field themselves. And I feel sometimes those of us outside of America looking into the game of America might have a different perspective and a different look at it. And it appears from this side, and I don't think this is an American thing, I think this is a worldwide thing, that the right are smaller and more well organized, and the left are larger and organized terribly. And that's why it feels like it's 50-50. I mean, if you have a look at the American election results, what was it, 96 was the last time the right won the popular vote, and other than that, since 92 or something, that's been all left. And that would say to me that the country is a left-wing country. More people have voted for the left over the last 30 years, bar one. Oh no, it wasn't. It was 2000. It was the second George Bush one, wasn't it? After the war, it was the second George Bush one that had more on the right. A bit like we had a left-wing government romping today after a response to COVID, because they had a good response to COVID, so they romped in like George W. Bush in his second term did after 9/11. But it seems that it's a left-wing country, and it seems that it's the same in New Zealand, probably the same in most Western countries. If you look at the policies, the majority of the country and the people sit to the left, but the left are shithouse at organizing and getting out there and participating. The right, who are louder and maybe more direct with their message, and more, I mean, if you look at the Republicans, for example, more on base with a message, even if half of them disagree with it, aka Donald Trump. But because they look united, feel united, and better organized, it comes across like a 50-50 win most of the time. But you've just said the left YouTube is terribly well organized. I just wonder if there's a relation between left politics, left people being worse and not as well organized versus the right as well.
Well, it's not that the left is not well organized. It's that there's when I say extraordinary, like when I go like this, extraordinary, like now multiply that times like 1,000, maybe a
You're right.
million.
Right.
They have so much money that they have in the last 5 years. I mean, folks who were on YouTube 5 years ago could make a banging. If you started before 5 years ago, you're in another league, and like congrats, and I love you guys, and you're amazing, and that's the Sams, and that's the that's the TYTs, like you're killing it on YouTube still, even with the, everybody's kind of hurting a little bit. But the algorithms have shifted because these algorithms are not transparent. You have nonprofits and political action committees and organization committees who are there to get right-wing folks elected at the state level, and where a lot of laws are being passed, right-wing laws are being passed, where gerrymandering has happened. So it's
Yeah.
not that, yes, they're better organized, but it's not that we're not better organized. We just don't have the money. Like we are being attacked on every single front. We don't have the money. We don't have the ability to get the message out. When we do have that like open time where there's the ability to get the message out, the movement grows. Bernie Sanders did a tremendous amount for the movement to grow. And there was a blind spot with the neoliberal Democratic Party is they didn't see him coming. And then the next thing you know, there's this massive movement for working people and organizing, and obviously Amazon workers and Starbucks workers and Nabisco workers and you name them. They're now doing the job that, frankly, the Democratic Party should have been supporting a long time ago. But the Republicans are surviving off of this minority because they have been able to fund a system in which they can, by design, win on small margins. The Electoral
Yeah.
College is a perfect example, but really,
Yep.
like at the legislative level, there's gerrymandering where you design a district so it fits for you. So it looks like there's illusion of a polarized world. But you're right. Like we are fundamentally a much more progressive, open-minded, labor-oriented country, just like I think the whole world is, actually, even in really complicated scenarios. But with that being said, like I also want to keep in mind that like we are also working people. People are being worked to death here. So if they don't turn out and vote, in some cases it's because they're not inspired, or no one's talking to them, or there's no party existing in their community to talk to them. But they just don't care because they're too busy working. They're
Yeah.
like, why should I go vote for like rando blah blah blah, like judicial? I am very well educated in politics, and I still look at my every election. I'm like, who's this person? Like,
Right.
I don't know who this is. So it's by design. It's a very complicated design, but it's all money, right? That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you talk about the systems of voting in America, that's what I see as being one of the biggest holdups. I mean, it's not one person, one vote when you can get more people voting in a country for one politician,
Yeah.
yet the other person wins. That it's not even. When you have 60 million people or whatever it is in California having the same number of governors or representatives as 2 million people in some fucking Dakota or whatever, and that doesn't work. It's not fair. We had a system in New Zealand called first past the post, which was a similar
Yep.
thing, which was, for people who don't know, obviously you do, is that you have a number of electorates in the country. It might have been 99, so you win 50, you're the government. But what would happen is you'd get, one party getting, let's say one party gets 3/4 of the votes in all of those areas. They might end up getting more. It was more like you'd get someone who ended up with 20 or 30% of the vote because of the number of people in each electorate who voted, but they might get one MP in because only one MP won one seat. Yeah. But 20% of the country is like, we want this party in, but they've only got one politician out of 99 because only one managed to get above the two major parties to get across. So we changed it to a mixed member proportional system, which isn't perfect in any way, shape, form whatsoever, but it's more you vote for your local MP, so your person who's in your electorate, and then you vote for which party you want to run. And so there's two votes.
It's kind of similar to the UK, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time. I actually did a lot of, we had a vote several years ago to, which should we change MMP, mixed member proportional, back to something else. And I did a whole bunch of TV appearances on them because I was really read up on it. And to be honest, I can't remember what they all are or what they are now. But what is important to know is that no matter what the system is, there's often overhung parliaments. So in the same year that we had a minority government, meaning no government making it to 50%, and so what, for people who don't understand that system, what has to happen then is that minority party has to partner with another party to get above 50%. So they join together. In the same year that happened, it happened in Australia under a different electoral system. and it happened in the UK under a different electoral system. Because even if it was first past the post where you only win an electorate, let's say there's 99 electorates, if one party wins 48 of them and one party wins another 48, and then there's a whole bunch of independents, then no one's made it to 50. So they have to side with some of the independents to form a party. And it's a nice system. And what it seems that America has done, so here in New Zealand, we have a Labour government, which is probably centre left, and we have a Green Party, which is further to the left, probably what the Americans would consider progressive. Our Democratic Party is just split. So rather than having all of these people in one party, the Labour, you think about the centre left Democrats would be our Labour Party, and the progressives would be our Green Party. And the election just gone 18 months ago or so, for the first time ever, we got a majority government. So because of the response to COVID, everyone was so enamored with, our.
Tell me about her. I'm enamored with her.
Yeah,
I'm so okay. Obviously, I'm a feminist, but I have this whole theory that like, if we just had a bunch of women in office, it would shift the way culture was. I know that there are a lot of women who mimic the patriarchy, but like fundamentally, when you get a group of women together, even the patriarchal, like bad acting women, like ends up shifting their it's just something about how we culture around each other. So I'm obsessed with her. Tell me what it's like. Like, is this a fantasy? Like, can you tell me what it's like living under a woman who has also did a great job on COVID? Like when the whole world is like blown apart. I'm so fascinated. Tell me.
I guess for us, it's not unusual. I mean, Jacinda's not the first female prime minister we've had. Like we had a woman called Jenny Shipley in the 1990s, who was our prime minister. She wasn't voted in, though. Her party was elected, and then the person who was a leader of that party resigned, and then the party elects a new leader. So she became prime minister, but from voting within the party during a political term. And then we had Helen Clark in the first decade of this century, and she was elected, and she got in at 1999. She was through there till 2008. And then, of course, Jacinda got in at 2018, whichever one, 2018, I think. Yeah, 2018. And so she's been through to now. So it's the last 30 years of New Zealand history. It's not unusual for us to have a female prime minister.
What's the secret sauce? Why?
I don't know, because we're normal people. And
you're not. Your normal people are not like that, actually.
Yeah, but you have to remember, you look at most Western democracies. Most Western democracies have had female prime ministers or leaders. So you guys are the outliers. We're not the outliers. And I mean, it's America that's the outliers when it comes to that. And also with your system of president, Senate, Congress sort of thing, it's very different. Other countries don't typically have that. We have a party we primarily vote for, and that party has a leader, and that leader is the prime minister.
Right.
Now, rather than we have an individual we vote for to be president, we don't. Although you can argue that people voted for Jacinda, even though they were voting for Labour, the party, but there's not actually a place to tick a ballot box or to say we want this person to be the prime minister. If the next day after Labour had formed the government, if Jacinda stepped down, then someone else from in that party would then be voted by the party, not the people, to be the leader, and that person would be the prime minister.
I mean, in a weird way, it is still like that in the States. Like we do have, people think that we have these primaries, I think not at the presidential level, but at the local level. They're much more democratic. But at the presidential level, which revealed itself in 2016, at the end of the day, the Democratic Party can do whatever they want. They can change the rules. I was part of that process, tried to flip it back and become more democratic, but it's a private corporation. It's not it's arguably not overseen by the Federal Elections Commission, but no, but I mean, that's it. Like they want to create the illusion of democracy, but really we have all these presidential primary debates, but at the end of the day, it was an inside party that decided, and the ones who were appointed and not elected decided.
Look, and there's always like complainers from every space. I mean, you're talking about this utopia we live in under Jacinda. There's a lot of people who think that, they call her Jab-Cinda because she forced everyone to get a vaccine and she's evil and that kind of stuff. But also, every election, typically our centre-right party which in America, our centre-right party voted for things like same-sex marriage. So it would blow Americans' brains to hear that that's our
Yeah.
conservative party did that sort of thing. But our centre-right party typically, like the last election was an anomaly because of COVID, but typically gets more MPs, more members of parliament in than our left-wing party. But our left-wing party, the two combined together, typically win. So let's say there's 100 seats. There's not, but just to make it easy, the right-wing party might get 45 seats every election.
Right.
Labour, the centre-left party, might get 40 seats every election, but then there's the Greens who get 10. You know, and then there's also always a couple of independents and a far-right party called ACT that get 2 or 3, and so it's always a minority government, other than this one time because of COVID. So basically, what happened was everyone was like, there are 3 countries in the world that have seen their life expectancy grow since the COVID pandemic started. There's South Korea. I think it's either Sweden or Norway. It's one of those Scandinavian countries, and there's us. Every other country, every other
Probably
Western
Finland,
country,
because they're also ruled by women.
maybe we're one of those Scandinavian countries, but and there's us whose life expectancies have gone up under COVID. Every other Western country that's in the, I guess it must be the OECD, their life expectancy has gone down. So I don't give a flying fuck what people think about our prime minister or our government or our party. For me, and I talked about someone the other day about this, I do like a daily live stream news show as well. And in that we were talking about, you know, a lot of the times that the prime minister has been giving speeches, it's kind of felt like a wartime speech. You know, I had the pulpit because of COVID. And it's like, in wartime, what's the outcome? And I think the outcome in wartime is to keep your people alive and keep your people safe.
That's right.
And if you want to use that as a metric, then New Zealand's done better than most countries in the world through COVID. So you can't really challenge that. Now, all the kind of other talking points, right wing, you know, vaccine mandates, all that kind of stuff, that, you know, by the by, you can have that debate. But actually, in wartime, the two things you want are your people to be safe and your people to be alive. And you actually can't, there's no way you can challenge that unless you're using fake data, which we all know goes around the world. A lot of it generated out of America, about what's happening with COVID and you know, the things it's doing to our DNA and all that kind of stuff.
How is that? I mean, that's immediately what I thought of is you've been able to succeed, and obviously there's pushback against her, but how has the culture of misinformation penetrated? I mean, it is literally like holding our society down here, but it obviously didn't work in New Zealand, but it exists. But is it spreading? Or do you guys have the protests on the streets? Do you have lawmakers MPs that are pushing it? Is it are the news, like, do they cover to the news? I mean, here they make it sound like it's like half of America. It's not.
Yeah, well, just not. And that's one of the things we point out very often. That is happening. There are the protests and the protesters. There was quite a significant one that lasted for 4 months on the lawn of our parliament. So they had a camp set up on the lawn of parliament. It would be the equivalent probably of like, you know, Capitol building having a Occupy thing on their lawn the whole time.
They have that in Puerto Rico right now. Same exact thing, which is sort of like a half parliamentary, half presidential system. It's very confusing in Puerto Rico because it is the US still. But I was like, what are they occupying? Because there's always protests there. And I'm walking there and it's like, oh, this is a total right-wing, like anti-jab, anti-vax community. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but like I had not seen, like, we have a lot of protests here, but I'd never seen an occupation. That was the first time I saw that.
Well, that's what it was. And I think it was about 4 months here in New Zealand. And, you know, there are a lot of people who say they should have cleared them out more quickly and they didn't. But I mean, we have a culture in New Zealand of protest being okay and acceptable. We have an Indigenous people, Māori, who got fucked over by the Crown. There was an actual treaty, only country in the world, I think, only colonized country in the world, that when Europeans turned up, they had a contractual agreement with the Indigenous people. It's called our treaty, and a lot of our laws and a lot of our societal rules are based around the treaty, which is a bicultural arrangement. You know, obviously we're in a multicultural country now, but a lot of our ethics and a lot of our laws, well, our laws do have to make sure we go back to the treaty and that it's represented correctly. But then obviously, much like any dirty deal, you sign a contract and then you fuck them over anyway, sort of thing. So, so we've had for quite a long time a culture of protest, whether it was in 1981 when the Springboks, the South African rugby football team, came to New Zealand, and basically a whole bunch of protesters stopped that tour from happening because of apartheid in America. Huge. I mean, Nelson Mandela told the story of being in Ellis Island and hearing about the protests in New Zealand and giving him sort of a courage. So, or occupations from Māori from their ancestral land that has been taken over, or whatever it is, it's sort of been a culture of it. So it has been happening. But what happened at Parliament, the 4-month protest there, I guess what I'm saying is the reason maybe that there wasn't quite such a heavy hand with clearing people out is because of the culture of allowing people to protest. But that was just an anti-vaxxer. No matter what you looked at or what, I mean, I covered it most days, or I sort of started my daily news show right at the very end of it. But when you looked at it, it was about the mandates. So in New Zealand, we had vaccine mandates for certain areas. You couldn't, if you weren't vaccinated, you couldn't be in schools, etc. So teachers lost their jobs. You couldn't do this and that and the other thing. And much like you said, it got sold by that protest and by the media a lot of the time as a divided country. There'd be people saying, this is dividing our country. And I would constantly say, no, actually, if 95% of people think one thing and 5% think the other, that's not a divided country. That's a majority with some outliers.
Right.
So I think the question I think you're kind of aiming at before is, how did you make this happen? And I think one of the reasons is 95% were on board. Now, what's happened since that protest started and since the mandates came in, which was about December of last year, is there are now people who are now going, who are maybe sliding across to the other side because it's been in fucking over 2 years. We're all getting a bit sick of this. And also there's a group of people who are fairly anti-vaccine. No matter what you say, they're going to be against it. And there are a group of people who are completely pro-vaccine. And then there's a group of people who sit in the middle. And some of them are like, look, I understand the precautions we had in place, but actually the vaccine mandates, I'm vaccinated, and I think that this is not me speaking, this is what they'd be saying. I'm vaccinated and I agree with the vaccine, but actually stopping people from working because of it is now, it's past that time. So there's that group in the middle that are sliding sort of away from perhaps that 95% majority, not to be supporters of the work that the anti-vaxxers are doing, but speaking in a similar voice to them about things like the mandates. Now, ironically, the mandates no longer exist. So they're gone now.
Right. Oh, that's my favorite. That because we had that the dumb left, and I'm sure you know what the dumb left is, but the dumb left in the States just teamed up with the far right. My talk, by the way, it's like I get these weird trolls. I just did something today where I was like, I'm sorry, the Red Brown Alliance, what are they on today? Attacking AOC, going after, saying NATO should not exist, or censorship. I'm not sure, but really it was the vaccines today. Actually, I didn't pick the right topic because they had a big rally in Los Angeles against the mandates. California has no mandates. Like, nobody has mandates anymore. I was like, what's the point of this? But you're right. It's, I think, I mean, you could be like China, like shutting down the country for not like another, I mean, people who are now vaccinated and have 2 boosters or 3 boosters, even when they get COVID, I mean, we have a wave of COVID happening in the city right now, and I'm choosing to wear my mask. But the truth is like, okay, if we know the science on this, if you've been vaccinated and if you have your boosters, you're not going to the hospital, right? Like, unless there's some really extraordinary situation. So I think that's where like the reasonable, the people who are pro-vaccine are like, I don't need to go into but we're not doing lockdowns. We did lockdowns for a half a second in our country. And then it was just this constant, fight between like Ron DeSantis, killing half of his population and the rest of us just riding it out, like waiting for it's complicated, but it is turned in, at least here, it's turned into a political identity. So I'm curious, like, is it growing your far right in New Zealand as a political identity?
I think one of the things you find in America, I used to do overnight talkback on a talkback station. And I worked out once that per capita, I had more listeners than Bill O'Reilly had viewers. And but the reality is we're a very small country. So that was only 100,000 people. Whereas in America, Bill O'Reilly could have 3 million people and become incredibly wealthy and rich because it's a big pool of people, even though it's a small percentage of the population. I think what I feel, and I don't know the answer to your question about proportionally, But I think because America is so big, if you've got a 1% response to an ideology, that's 3.5 million people.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so it's very easy to get together a protest or a march of 10,000 people out of 3.5 million if they passionately believe something. If that 1% of people were here in New Zealand, what would that be? That'd be 100,000 or 10,000? I don't know. I mean, 10% would be 5, so it'd be 50,000 people. It'd be a lot harder to get a march of 10,000 people together in a country out of 50,000 people. So I think that's probably the visual aspect of it, I think, is a part of it. I also think, back to the conversation about how we've been able to do this in this country, I think our politicians, for a good portion of the pandemic, spoke with one voice. Even, you know, no matter whether we're on the spectrum. I think what I'm seeing now is our centre-right party and the new leader we've got there is starting to speak out, and you know, some of those right-wing American talking points are coming out now.
Oh my god!
Because it's safe to do so. Now he may not say they're from America, but they echo,
of course not,
those vibes. Whereas sort of 3, 4, 5, 6 months into the pandemic, first time round, P1, our leader of the right-wing party said something echoing those points on his Facebook page, his own Facebook page. So his supporters got so much pushback from it that he basically had to step down.
Wow.
His position was untenable. It's a guy called Simon Bridges, that he made a Facebook post criticizing the government's response within, I mean, it was probably sooner than this, but it felt like within 3 months or 6 months of the initial March 2020 lockdowns, and it ended his political career. So for a good portion, we spoke, our politicians spoke as one voice. It's only probably since, and this is the, you know, political commentator in me, when the mandates came in last year and the protest popped up at Parliament, those on the right are now feeling more comfortable that they realize that there is there's an audience for sharing these things now, but it's still nothing like the right in America. Like, let me make that clear. But making some kind of, you know, it's time to get rid of these mandates sort of comments and stuff, which they wouldn't have made, you know, 12 months ago, because the country voted in a left-wing government with something like 60 or 55% of the vote, which has never happened to the left or the right in New Zealand since this new electoral system has come in, which has been since 92 or 94.
Well, listen, all they have to do is buy a bunch of bots and pretend that they have more base, and that's the model, right? Like Elon Musk has his little empire of bots that's been reported on, and you know, nothing's real. Just funnel some crypto. Oh, actually, I'm so curious. You live in New Zealand. What's up with like the Peter Thiels of the world? Why are they invading? What's going on there? They're all like hiding in New Zealand.
I think Peter Thiel might have just sold his place. I think so. Where I live in Dunedin, bottom of the South Island, we're a 3-hour drive from Queenstown. So Queenstown is the Beverly Hills of New Zealand. It's lifestyles of the rich and famous, except it's Beverly Hills with the most iconic, gorgeous snowscape in the background, sort of thing. But the money, that's where the money is, you know. So if you want to, I mean, it's not entirely, because we have beautiful, you know, we've got a massive coastline because we're an island nation. And so if you want to be rich and have a really big house or have a really big holiday place, there's all the coastlines around Northland and Auckland, and within a couple of hour drive of Auckland or Wellington. But you know, if you want to find a $30 or $40 million house in New Zealand, Queenstown is the place to go to find that.
Because they're all escaping climate change. They're like, oh, let's take advantage of this leftist government and kill all the other governments around the world. Well,
the thing is, a non-citizen can't do that in New Zealand. A non-citizen have to be approved to buy property here. You can't just come in and buy property. We have a government agency that says, what are you buying? Why? And basically, you can't just come in and buy land, because if you're not a citizen, then you need you need to go through a process to buy land.
I can't launder my money through your real estate industry and create a speculative market? What are you talking about, man?
The Shania Twains of the world, who have had property up in central Otago, which is where Queenstown is. There are a lot of people who do. I also think, if I'm being honest, if you've got enough money to inject some positive return into the economy or into the region you want to move into, and you're an international billionaire, then you probably have a lighter, easier path through that buying land than if you were a fish and chip shop owner coming out of, you know, Brisbane, Australia, sort of thing. So I think there still is a bit of wealth privilege there that they do get in, but you can't. Peter Thiel just can't turn up, land on a plane, and buy a property. He can't do that. He does have to go through some official channels, and the reason is, it's funny because you know, the Peter Thiels of the world that have amassed their fortune based on things like Republican help and talking points and policies and that, are coming to places that are being seen as sort of a socialist, free healthcare run by well, not run by, but the female prime minister, left-wing government. And why? It's because I think that's actually feels more normal. I mean, it feels like, I mean, that doesn't mean that we're going to be a left-wing government in 18 months under our next election,
right, under them,
but it does flip backwards and forward. And the thing is, when the quote unquote right gets in here in New Zealand, it doesn't change that much. I mean, you do get the same things like around the you know, tax changes and stuff, but we don't really socially engineer so much ideologically on the left versus the right. You know, like I said, our right-wing then prime minister voted for same-sex marriage, as did most of the right.
They said the same thing in the UK. They said the same thing in France. But then the next thing you know, Marine Le Pen and you know, Boris Johnson and obviously much worse. Like, I'm not trying to be a naysayer, but I think there's a difference between like Europe and the US is like there's just a fundamental kind of like basis of human rights that, because for many reasons, many of the countries that are in the European alliance and NATO alliance, if you want to go through that, have experienced the consequences of war like directly, whereas we're so removed from it. Even if we are immigrants, it's you know, many of us come from, you know, immigrant backgrounds, escaping war and famine and so much. Not anymore. Now you have to buy your seat at the table in the US. Like, you really got to buy it. But because of that, like, we're just so libertarian here. And I love it. Like, when I go to Europe and I've lived there, and I had a loved one, like a boyfriend there, and I was always communicating back and forth with him, being like, he didn't understand. He just didn't understand how, like, you make a mistake in the US, it's going to cost you money. And then that's going to cost you money. And then that's going to it's like a debt. We live in a debtor's prison in the US.
Well, but on top of that, you can't sue in New Zealand. We don't have a culture of suing. Like, there is no ability to sue. You can't sue. So we have our government has, and I'll tell you something. I'll give you an example of how even your right-wing commentators don't know what they're talking about. And actually, Sam is someone who pointed this out to me. So the government took away the right to sue and said you can't sue people. And they instigated a government agency called Accident Compensation Corporation, ACC. So if, for example, I get hit by a car and it's the car driver's fault, the government will provide me money for my recovery if I need, like, if I have to have a year off because I've got pins in my legs because of that accident, I don't sue the driver. I get a government grant or government money to pay for it. So that's our offset. So we don't
have insurance companies that are.
Yeah, we have insurance companies as well. Okay. But if you're not insured or anything, like in America, if you don't have health care, and if you know, we've all seen those Michael Moore documentaries where the person had to pick which finger he was gonna keep for amputation, and he kept the ring finger because he was married. We don't have that. Like, my mother passed away of motor neuron disease. I talked about it earlier. Motor neuron disease. She had a chair from Germany. She had a bed from Japan. She spent, you know, several days in hospital at the end, and didn't cost my parents a cent. All public healthcare, you know. I mean, it did cost them a cent, but it was paid for in their taxes over their 40-year working career, you know. So so it did cost them a cent. So when those fucking idiot Americans go, who's going to pay for it? The answer is we pay for it in our taxes. It's that's what it is. But I had Dave Rubin on.
Oh boy, what? Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Oh, that must be
I'll talk to anyone, man. It's great fun.
Sure, Sam got a kick out of that.
Well, he used one of the clips. This is why he actually educated me on something I'd done with Dave Rubin, which I wasn't aware of, because I was asking him about, you know, about healthcare and about free healthcare and about that, and I explained to her how it happens in New Zealand. I'm like, you know, we go to the doctor and it's subsidized, and you pay $20 or $40 to go to the doctor, and you come away from the doctor, and you've got a script for the chemist or for the pharmacy, and you go to the chemist and you give them your script, and they no matter what they give you, they go, that's $5. So you give them $5, and they give you your script, and that's subsidized, and you walk away. And I explained it all to him. And Dave Rubin went, oh, look, I'd be okay with a system like that. Now, Sam actually played that clip on the Majority Report, and I wasn't aware of this because even though I say I ingest American culture, I missed it, and I wasn't aware of it. But Sam said that I had just described Obamacare, and Dave Rubin had just said yes to that system. Yeah. So he didn't even know what he was talking about in that moment.
That is like a very classic Sam situation, like dunking on Dave Rubin for his complete idiocy and lack of awareness. I just think like Dave Rubin doesn't care. He's just like, whatever, you proved me wrong. I'm more famous now. I'm fighting with you. Like, that's the model they're operating on, and we're operating the model of like, We need to prove you wrong and maybe pull a few of your audience members over back to the left. But they're just like, we don't care. We are like throwing it all against the wall, seeing what sticks, and winning elections as a result. And the messaging wars.
Testing it. Yeah, they're testing it. But the other thing that we were talking about earlier about when you said for now about this, utopia we live in. I agree with you. You can never project the future. But one of the differences we do have in New Zealand is we're incredibly laid back and relaxed and chill, like in general. I know it's a stereotype, but in general. But the second thing is those countries you've mentioned in Europe have boundaries with other countries.
Right.
And so it's quite easy to point to that boundary and go, those others coming in from over there, we don't have that. You have to get in a fucking plane and fly for dozens of hours to get to us. So it's a bit of a harder sell, I think, to put out there the influx, even though we do have it, the influx of refugees, the influx of of migrants and stuff. But actually, I think there's enough of a disconnect, especially with our boundaries, for most people to kind of go, what I do quite a lot, and I talk about leading a horse to water. Now you can never you can never make that horse drink, but you can lead it to water. So that's what I try and do on my daily. It's called Big Hairy News, the daily news show, which is what I try and do. I try and lead a horse to water, and we do that all the time. We did it the other day because we had the new right leader coming out talking about all these New Zealanders are going to now leave. There's up to 50,000 New Zealanders are going to leave New Zealand. And so what I did was I went and found the stats, and I looked back to 2002, and we averaged between kind of 45 and 72,000 people leaving New Zealand every year. Ironically, under the last right-wing government was the time when most people left New Zealand. Oh. So I wanted to make sure people knew that. But also then because only 8,000 people left New Zealand last year because of COVID, no one was leaving because it's one of the safest countries in the world. Right. Yes, there's going to be a big jump, but I want people to know that our national government's going to come out saying, look, it's a 700-fold increase. It's like, well, no, that's just bringing it back to where the norm is. It's not actually bad. This is what happens every year. Yeah. So I want to be able to lead a horse to water and say, this is normal. Now, if people drink or not, that's up to them. But at least the information's then out there for this political party or person or profile or whatever to not be able to spin it in a way that benefits them inaccurately. So that's what we try and do.
It's almost like the crime stats in the US right now. I mean, people, I was on Benjamin Dixon is a dear friend of mine, and I was on a show the other day on Wednesday morning, and we were talking because the shootings happened, and I don't know if this made it across the ponds because we're many ponds away from each other. But we had a mass shooting on the subway in New York City and in Brooklyn. And, our mayor, a former cop who did not win with a mandate by any means, like very, very low turnout and crowded primary and ranked choice voting. So like he won with the minimal number that you could possibly imagine. And he's been pushing for the last talking about crime. It's like, it's the 80s again. He's like going to nightclubs and dancing with like crypto people and like, going like with celebrities and then, there is a spike in crime. But the difference is that the crime here is not like one type of crime. It's everything from people pushing on the subway into the platform with mental health issues to there was a guy with a machete in her neighborhood like the day before the shooting. So it was like 4 days ago. Then there was the mass shooting, and then there's crime due to gang violence, which is real. The gang violence is a result of more people using illegal substances. And so it's being dealt more. With that being said, like 6 years ago, this would have been the best year when it comes to crime ever in New York City. So it's all relative. Like, what are you basing it off of? Which numbers? Okay, yeah, it's a spike. A lot of it's unpredictable. It can't be targeted. It's not back to one issue. In the 80s and 90s, it was rooted in a couple of things. But we have a housing crisis here. We have a mental health crisis here. We have the guy who did the shooting got his guns in a Republican state where there's weak gun laws, where you could have done background checks, but they got rid of them. And he is not, he moved the guns from another state here to have and it was based on a mental health issue. We have no mental health.
But that's the difference. Like, I mean, like without trying to oversimplify it, the homeless issue, the mental health issue, the drugs issue, that's in every Western country in the world. What there's not is the gun issue. I mean,
Yes.
that's the unique situation to America, is the culture of gun, because all of those, I mean, no matter what pearl clutching right wing mother out of the Midwest talks about violent video games, that kind of stuff, all of those things are in every other, especially Western country, but every other country in the world. In fact, in many
Mm.
countries, so much more prevalent. What there isn't in those other countries is the gun culture, and that's where you guys have that kind of nailed down. So when you do get the mental health issue with the person in the subway, you know, they've got a Glock on them, rather than, I mean, yeah, okay, might have a knife, or rather than just his fists in most other countries in the world.
And the difference also with other countries in the world is, you guys, for the most part, every no, really not for the most part, every Western country, modern democracy, liberal democracy on the planet, except for, and some that are not so liberal, except for the United States, has a healthcare system that
Yeah.
provides. And so, you know,
Yes.
people say, well, you can lead a horse to water, but they can, oh, if they have mental health issues, they still have to go get the help, seek the treatment. But anybody, most people on this planet who've dealt with mental health issues knows that if you deal with things early on, it doesn't exacerbate to the level. It can get out of control based on events, triggers, drug use, caffeine use, alcohol use, losing your job, losing your home, all of the things that we're facing in this dystopian nightmare of the United States. Yeah, that's it.
And, and the healthcare thing is interesting. I know we said about an hour. Are you okay for time at the moment? Because I wanted to actually.
I have about. I'm so sorry. I have about 4 more minutes.
Okay.
I need to do this.
Let me.
I scheduled a conference call at 6 p.m. It's my mistake on a Friday.
I'm going to ask you one quick question, but the point I was going to make is, I watch Dr. Pimple Popper with my 15-year-old daughter sometimes. That show couldn't exist in any other country in the world.
I love it though. It's so good.
But it couldn't exist in any other country in the world, because places with free healthcare don't have fucking people with basketballs coming out the side of their head for 25 years because they go and get it sorted out because they have free healthcare. So that's And look, I wanted to ask you a couple of things.
Wait, can I just add? I went to the dentist yesterday, and this is also an example of our effed up dystopian culture. I had not gotten a dental cleaning, like a teeth cleaning, in 2 years since the pandemic.
Wow.
And it was because before the pandemic, I went to a new dentist who sucked, gave me a really bad cleaning. And then I was like, oh, I'll just go again in like 4 months. And then the pandemic happened and the lockdown. And then like it finally opened up like a year later. And then I kept having to cancel. So finally I got a new dentist, my dear friend, very good friend of mine since I was 16. She's also a comedian. She's amazing. Maya Deshma, go check her out. So she's looking at my teeth and she's like, oh, no, me, girl, no, me, this is bad. This is bad. And I'm really embarrassed. And she's like, she's saying to me as she's like, I have to go in. I got to go in deep. And I'm like, seeing she's getting kind of high off of it. And I'm like, wait, is this like when someone's popping pimple? Like you're watching the videos of people popping pimples. She's like, yes, pulling out the plaque. She was like getting high off of the plaque. So fun fact, there should be a doctor plaque also.
I'm sure there are. In fact, I see them on TikTok all the time. People cleaning plaque behind their teeth. It's a fascinating thing to watch.
There's like I want pebbles that pop out.
we might have to catch up later in the year or something if you're up for that.
Okay.
I'd love to.
I'm down.
But I do want to, before we go, I want to ask you just about Elon Musk and Twitter. I mean, we're watching that from this side of the world. I'd like to get your take on that.
Oh my God, this guy is like a mountain. I just think that like this era of billionaires, his genre, they've kind of built like, okay, yeah, they were successful in one industry, which is great, but they're not, it's like a mountain of lies. It's actually very Donald Trump. Like one good deal leads to a bunch of bullshit deals and like money laundering and tax evasion schemes. And I came up with this in marketing schemes and I hired some bots to boost this argument. And then at the end of the day, it's like a house of cards. Everyone was like, oh, well, Elon Musk is brilliant. I'm like, why? How is he brilliant? What did he do? Oh, well, you know, electric cars that keep being pulled off the market that he didn't invent. Oh, spaceship. That's not something he invented either. He's really good at like milking the government for money to subsidize his projects that he didn't invent. Like Steve Jobs is a broken man, But he like, I have my schedule on this. I FaceTime with people in Libya on this. I order my eggs in the morning on this. Fascist organized revolutions on this. Leftist organized revolutions on this. YouTube shows can be hosted. Like, let me go through the things that came out of that nutty guy's mind. But that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And that guy deserved to be the richest man in the world, even though I don't even believe in capitalism. Like Steve Jobs, I'm like, all right, okay, it's worth it, even though he's a little nutty. Elon Musk, man, this is like his person. This is a guy like grew up in so much privilege and is just exercising all of his demons on democracy. I don't know what to say other than that.
Do you think it's going to be a net positive or a net negative having if let's say he gets it, he spends his 43 billion, he gets 100%, what's it going to do to Twitter? Because there's a part of it which I'm thinking, I'm always a little bit concerned about this idea of Twitter restrictions and that sort of thing, and I would think there wouldn't be any under him. Do you think it's going to make for a better or a worse platform if he gets the ownership of it?
One man power over a board. I mean, listen, Twitter is extremely problematic as it is. And Elon Musk might say something like, no more canceling people, but like, this is a man who's built his entire like empire of lies on Twitter off of bots. I mean, those are the articles that have been coming out all week. And granted, it was probably pushed by other members of the board. But I think a few minutes ago, less than an hour ago, I don't know when this is going to post, but the board pushed back against Elon Musk. Let me see if I can find. Twitter rebuffed Elon Musk's takeover bid with so-called poison pill that would flood the market with new shares if he buys 15% of his stock. Actually, that was a few hours ago. So I think there's going to be a push-pull. I'm not a believer in any one-man person owning anything. And frankly, like if that were the case, I'm already thinking about getting off of all these platforms. Like it's exhausting. So that's where I am. We'll catch up in 6 months, whether or not.
I think we should. If you're down for it, I think we should. If people want to find you, the Nomiki Show, and that's Nomiki Konst US on Facebook. What's the best way for people to find you? That seems to be a pretty good place on Facebook. Where else is a good place? You know, I've got your Insta up there as well, and I've got your Twitter up there as well.
All the places: Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Apple Podcasts. That we have like a pretty good following on the podcast world. Which I don't push enough. And that's actually, I think, where most people find us. So go check us out at all those places in the Majority Report. And I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
Patreon.com.
It's been real fun to talk to you.
Thank you.
I really enjoy. I know it's been a bit of a hassle getting it connected over the I guess we are over the Atlantic, or we're over the Pacific and then across the whole of America to get to you, whichever way we want to go. But thanks for giving us some time today. And I would love to catch up in several months' time and do an update, and actually at some stage get to the questions I actually wrote down, which we didn't even touch because
oh my gosh,
we had a lovely conversation instead.
This was so much fun. Next time, let's do it like when I'm on the West Coast, because I don't know if that's easier. Actually, it might be worse.
Yeah,
we're almost full circle. It is better.
Yeah,
okay.
No. About 3 hours difference to LA and about 5, I think, or 6 or 7 to New York.
I'm going to be in San Francisco on Sunday. You should have told me. Okay.
Nomiki Konst, thanks for joining us. Appreciate all your time and love your work.
Same here. Take care.